This looks like a job for Night Monkey. This is your look at the new Hot Toys Spider-Man Far From Home, the Spider-Man Stealth Suit Deluxe version. In Spider-Man Far From Home, Peter Parker returns for a summer trip to Europe with his best friend, and he had hoped to leave Spider Heroics behind for a few weeks. While abroad, the young Spidey is recruited by Nick Fury to investigate a series of attacks, creating havoc across the continent. To prepare fans for Spider-Man's latest adventure, Hot Toys are very excited to officially present the Deluxe version 6-scale Spider-Man collectible figure featuring his brand new tactical stealth suit. Before we go checking out Stealth Suit Spider-Man, the first thing we're going to want to do is figure out how tall the figure actually stands. Now, I found actually a new place where I can pick up a lot of my Hot Toys from, nice and early. The site is currently under construction. They're finessing a few things, but eventually when that site is up and running, I'll let you guys know, and I'll provide the link down below in the video description. In the meantime, Stealth Suit Spidey, or Night Monkey, stands 12 inches exactly. And we can switch that to centimeters, revealing that the 6th scale of Spider-Man stands 30.5 centimeters in height. To give you guys some size comparisons of how Stealth Suit Spider-Man stacks up with, say, another Spider-Man. Wow, that's a lot of S's. We can bring in the original Spider-Man, Homecoming Spider-Man. Still, I like the figure, but I have to say, the problem with this seam very visibly on the front is still something that bothers me when I look at it. I wish they had found a different way to stitch that cloth onto Spider-Man's head. Now, of course, there's the option of molded, sculpted heads made of plastic, but I still prefer the seamless look of having Spider-Man's fabric head blend and match with the rest of his body. Again, they probably could have seamed the back of it, but obviously that's not the whole purpose of this review. It's simply just to show you how the original Homecoming Spider-Man stacks up with the brand new Stealth release. Now, I was fortunate enough to pick up the deluxe version of Spider-Man, which includes the following pretty cool looking accessory, or should I probably say pretty hot looking accessory. To come included with the deluxe version and deluxe version only, you do get yourself this awesome looking Molten Man diorama display base. This was designed by Studio Hive and actually has some light up features going for it. The one thing I do like about it though is if you don't decide to light it up, which I'll show you in a second, it actually just serves perfectly nice as just a display piece that you can look and adore. They've got some exquisite looking coloring to it. You can see Molten Man's face right there, sort of wrapped around and engulfed by different boulders and fallen debris. You can see the one gripping hand up at the top, about to grab onto Spider-Man with some really nice additional decorative details. You can see the nice paintwork done to the fallen rubble. You'll also see there's a hole right there that will play a purpose in a second. But as it stands, certainly for a display base, it's definitely one of the better, elaborate looking display bases. It adds a lot to the character, doesn't take too much away, and it still allows you to display and stand the figure either flatly on here, which I'll show you in a second, or that included hole that's located at the back, which I'll show you in a second as well. Flip this upside down and spin it around. It's actually got two different modes. You'll see there's on 1 and on 2 with a middle neighbor of off right in the center there. Does take batteries. I will tell you though, the batteries were not included, so you have to install 3 AAA batteries by yourself if you're capable of doing that. To switch it between the two modes, one mode is just a standard light up mode. We'll go ahead and just switch that to on right now. And you'll see how well that illuminates. LED lights, as you can see, run through the full stretch of Molten Man from the front of his head, as detailed as that is. The inner mouth really looks nice with that nice bright yellow light, all the way to the very end of his fingertips. Now, I will say some level of caution should be made when it comes to switching it to level 2. Switching it to on 2 switches it from a full steady light to that of one that's pulsating. Now, I seem to have seen pulsating effects in different videos where it looked like it pulsated differently. I don't know if it's just the way that this studio light is, but you can see it does pulsate. But I still would say you will be careful of this. If somebody is someone that experiences some issues with pulsating lights, you may want to just kind of, may keep it maybe to necessarily the on one setting. I do like the sense that it looks from a distance like it's glowing like flowing molten lava. The idea of being able then to switch it between 1 and 2 decides for yourself, or you can decide for yourself, whether you want to have it pulsating or if you want to just have it a straight steady light. And because it only uses AAA batteries as its power source, it doesn't mean that it's going to be draining button cell batteries. And that would be the one thing I wouldn't want it to do. Normally, when it comes to bases like this, they don't tend to use button cell batteries because of the amount of power that's required for it. They usually relegate those then to the figures. I wish there was, maybe if anything, a secondary option to power this. Maybe a USB port, for example. You could then plug it into an external USB hub or anything that enables USB connectivity, just so that you didn't have to rely on batteries. And certainly also as well if you wanted to run this all the time, which would be very draining to the batteries themselves. But like I said, there are two ways to display Spider-Man on the stand. You can either have him standing just on top the flat area of the rubble, or you can go ahead, attach the adjustable neck that comes included with the figure, and of course just twist that in place. Either way you decide to display Spider-Man, I would still advise probably still using the display stand that comes included the adjustable neck. You can bring, of course, the waist clamp further down and clamp around Spider-Man's legs. Because even if you do have Spider-Man, as I've not completely tightened this up, even if you have Spider-Man firmly planted on the flatter end of the base, I still don't feel it's enough standard, strong enough footing that the figure may still be falling off. So again, you can either display him standing. Let's go ahead. Let's bring this down a little bit so you guys can see what I'm talking about. Bring this back a little bit. Actually, you know what? We'll just bring it up a little bit. And you can go ahead and clamp it around Spider-Man's, well, it's not so much waist in this case. But you can clamp it around so that he's not going to be falling over. Or again, if you want to bring that waist clip up a little higher, then of course you can have him in more dynamic swinging poses as well. Stealth Suit Spidey comes with some of the standard offerings you'd expect to find with a 6-scale version of everybody's favorite wall crawler. Those accessories include your typical tray of different webbings, some shorter, some longer. They all sort of work the exact same way. You can attach them to his web shooters, which I'll show you in a second. You can see in all cases, well, at least you're only looking at one for the time being, that are all made of translucent plastic, a nice clear translucent plastic. And you get several different versions of it. Shorter versions, I always like to kind of keep these in trays just so I don't lose them or break them. You've got regular standard length ones that really don't connect to anything just yet. And then you've also got yourself a bent version of that same straight line. You can also go ahead, it comes included with the same funnel suction that comes included with all the Spider-Man, it seems. You can go ahead and take one of the ends of the straight lines and just attach it. There's a little hole, just, I don't know if you can see it or not, just a hole on the end, and that just fits in place. I've had instances in the past where these have broken off. If you're not too careful and you don't feed it in well enough, I've had a couple of these lines break when trying to fit this in place. But I do like the idea that they always include these. Yes, it's the same old samesies as we always get before, but I still always like the fact and appreciate the fact that we get them. I don't feel like they necessarily have to reinvent the webbing. We'll put those to the side. He also comes included with the swing web. Like this is what I had at the beginning of the review, where it looks like he's grabbing onto the web with his one hand. And I always really like to include this when it comes to my displays of Spider-Man. I really like the fact that they use these. Now what you can do is he does come with a couple of gripping hands, for example, that you'll see holes in these. These are ideal for, of course, holding on to those web lines that we had just talked about recently. You can go ahead, and especially with this case, you just pry this open, fit it in on one side. You will have to be careful because the distance that they give you really isn't wide enough. But you can get that, and you can fit that into Spider-Man's hand. This, of all the webs, I feel is my preferred favorite. I just really like the way that this is designed. Yes, it doesn't really have any connecting end to it. I suppose you could, if you want to, add the funnel to the end of it, but I do always like the fact that they include this specific web. This is by far my favorite of the batch. Let's have a look, actually, while we're at the rest of his additional hands. Now, currently in the sockets, he's got some closed fists. Yawn, I know it's not the most exciting, but he does also come with another, or a pair, to complete the pair, I suppose. the gripping hand for holding the web. He has a couple of gestured hands. I always really like the looks of these. Or web holding hands if you want to have them, for example, clinging onto the side of a wall. These are ideal, the best hands for the job. I do like the detail that they incorporate to the inside. Not really much in the way of black, or not much in the way of other than black. Black is basically all the color you're getting here. And in this case, Spider-Man goes fingerless gloves. Everybody was wearing fingerless gloves. It's a Lonely Island song. He does also come with a couple of gestured hands. I do like and appreciate these ones. And he does also come with some web shooting hands. Of course he does. Spider-Man would seem absent if he didn't have a couple of web shooting hands, and he gets himself a pair. Spider-Man also gets his standard fare, his replaceable pegs. So if you do lose one or break one, or you get that stubborn one that doesn't want to leave its hand, well, you get 2 extras to work with. And again, I always appreciate the fact that they come included with these, because you never know when you may lose, break, or get a stubborn peg stuck in the socket of the hand. You get those as well. Moving on to something rather strange, I'm sure, until I describe what it is. He comes included with this flesh-colored stump. No, there's a better explanation for it. He comes also included with a bare neck that you can replace with the existing neck and the existing head that is currently on his shoulders. And you can use either one of the Iron Spider-Man Peter Parker heads, or you can use the original Spider-Man Homecoming head sculpt of Peter Parker. And you can fit that right on the socket. Now, right now, you're seeing just an invisible head. This would have been an ideal time for me to bring in the head sculpt, but I don't know whereabouts I've put it, sadly. So if I do end up ultimately finding it, I'll do a follow-up video, but essentially you know what that Peter Parker head sculpt is. Sticks right on the top, and then you can go ahead and replace it with the neck and the head currently on top of the shoulders of the stealth suit Spider-Man. And you can decide instead to display the figure with the Peter Parker head sculpt. I love the fact that they include this. Simplicity at best, but I do appreciate the fact that if you decide you want to change the Peter Parker's head sculpt, obviously you're probably not going to want to keep the neck that's currently in the socket. You're going to want to replace it with a flesh-colored one instead, and I'm glad to see that they include that. He also gets himself a pair of goggles, though currently you're only seeing one of them. The obviously other one is already attached to his head sculpt, and they do differ from one another. This one doesn't have any moving hinge, which seems a bit strange until I describe the other one what it does. But this one does benefit from having removable eyes, the lenses themselves. You can just pop them off. Now, instead of using magnets, I guess for how thick these ended up being, they relied instead on just using a peg system. You can see there's a peg on the bottom here. If I flip actually the goggles around, I don't know if you see it on the lenses themselves, one is a rectangular shape and one is a circle shape. So there's only one way to put it in place. It comes with a couple of different variations of the lenses. Let's pop this one in so I can show you. They're not difficult at all to necessarily put in place. Again, I feel magnets would have made the more logical sense, but judging by how thick they allot on the back of it, I don't think they'd be able to put a magnet in there. The other one, we'll go ahead and just pop this off. And then we'll replace it also with the alternate. Now, keeping in mind, as I'm putting this in place, you do get a pair of both. It's not a strange case where you're going to have one open lens and one closed lens, but essentially what you're going to do, probably makes a little more sense if I spin this around so you can see it. Plug this one in place as well. And here are the variations of goggles or lenses that you get. Now we go back to the one we originally started with. You can see it's a much smaller looking scope of lens. And then the other options, of course, is the wider lens on the one side and the more narrow lens on the other. Detail is quite rather nice on this. You can see there is that honeycomb texturing that they gave to it. And it's almost got a slight pearl coloring as well to it. Now the difference with this one versus the one that's currently on his head, let's go ahead and grab the figure right now. The one that's already on his head, let's just do a comparison side to side so you guys can see. They don't look that much different from one another, although I feel like the one that changes the lenses out on seems like it's further apart than this one right here. Let's put the two above one another so you guys can actually see. It could simply just be an optical illusion. It could be just my eyes playing tricks on me. But it does seem like that the eyes on the one that has the removable lenses are further apart from one another. But the only difference is that on this one, you can actually lift the goggles up. There's a little hinge on it, and you can raise that up. and you can expose Peter Parker's eyes underneath that. That is a nice looking touch. You can see the way that they've sculpted the eyes as well. He's only facing one direction. He's looking this way. I guess that is good. I mean, some people prefer to have their eyes looking dead set center. I kind of like, it depends on really the figure, because it does add a little bit extra, short of actually having to go in there with a purse and adjust it by joystick. Adding the eyes having a slight angled tilt to it does give a little extra personality, I feel. But the idea is you just go ahead and pop this off. Now this is attached by magnets. Then you go ahead and just replace it with the other one. You can see there's the magnet dead center in the center of his face. And then you just replace it with this one. Now, in a strange way, I feel like they probably could have pulled off the same feat and used only one set of goggles. I don't know why they would have given us two. I mean, really, you could say, I mean, let's go ahead and just pop this off so you guys can see the difference between the two. You could say, obviously, let's flip this around, there's a little bit of extra thickness on one versus the other. And I guess maybe that's one of the reasonings why they did give you the two of them, because the one that has the hinge sits a little flusher to his face. I mean, for me, I probably would not decide to change out the lenses on this one. I kind of like the idea of instead of just having the one that has the hinge. I guess now when I think about it, before when I immediately got this guy out of the packaging, I found myself asking the question that you guys probably were asking just in a second ago. Why didn't they just give you the exact same lens? Give it a hinge and give you the option then to change out the actual lenses on it. But again, judging by the fact that the one that does have the replaceable lenses is a little bit thicker, I guess they did give you the option if you wanted to have then the goggles on this one sit a little flatter, sit a little flusher to Spider-Man's face. So getting a closer look at Stealth Suit Spider-Man, which I'm sure many collectors would just ultimately coin Night Monkey, I like the design of this one quite a bit. It would not be my favorable choice for having him look like this in the entire movie, so I'm glad he still ultimately reverted back to a more commonly recognized looking Spider-Man costume. The design of this one very much reminds me of Spider-Man Noir, certainly not only just in the color, but also the design of him as well. Now you'll see, unlike this Spider-Man Homecoming version, this head sculpt is just all molded plastic, and even the goggles themselves are molded to the head sculpt. I could say it's a shame that they didn't actually use the same material that they used for the rest of his body. But then having learned my lesson from the Spider-Man Homecoming version of Spider-Man with that big obnoxious seam line right in the middle, maybe it's probably for the best that they decided to go plastic. I feel also if you're going to be using magnets and lifting up the goggles, for example, up and down, which for some reason on this one, I just find like the hinge is either too tight or the magnet is too loose. Every time I do want to hinge that up, I find ultimately I'm just pulling the goggles right off. Yes, it would have been nice if they had actually used fabric to wrap the head instead of relying on plastic. Plastic, while it does give you a good sculpt, I feel the reflection that comes off of it does read very much more like plastic. If they had gone this route, yes, it would have probably looked a lot nicer, but yes, it probably would have had a very obnoxious looking seam line, a stitch line around the front there. But the detailing on his head sculpt is very nice. I like the idea, again, of having that hinged up goggle. As you look a little bit further back in the rest of the figure, you know, strangely I'm saying this, when I look at the design of Spider-Man from at least not so much the head, but from the neck all the way down, I get very much a vibe of Deadpool. Yes, maybe the colors are obviously not Deadpool inspired. There's no red anywhere to be said here. But I get very much like the same sort of style of costume. Just, again, all done in black. He's got several layers going for him. One nice little touch, by the way, is the fact that they give him a sculpted-in zipper, though it doesn't actually serve a purpose. They sculpted a actual zipper teeth all the way down to where his belt actually is. The belt also reminds me of Black Widow's belt, so I feel like there's a lot of inspirations at play when it came to the design of this particular costume. He has the additional shoulder pads. Now, the shoulder pads are separate pieces. As you can see, you can actually wiggle them up and down, but they're tight enough when you get to them further to the top that they're not shifting down. Like, so if you feel like you're moving the arm and this is going to slide down on you, no, that's not the case at all. Nice detailing on it, though again, it's all black on black, on black, on black. Where it does break up and separate a little bit is where the texturing of the material differs from then the additional plastic that they used over top of it, where you get the more smoother look. I do like the fact it does differ a little bit. Like the sleeves, for example, is not the same fabric as the rest of his torso. It's a more smoother looking fabric. And then, of course, you've got the overlays of plastic over top of it. Like with all Spider-Man, he does have still the web shooters you can see on both sides, or at least one side of both sides, all painted nicely there in silver, with a little bit of additional red there on the very end of it. Again, fingerless gloves. Moving a little bit further down, of course, all the things that are attached to Spider-Man's costume are done via these buckles. Now, none of these actually, of course, open up. They're just sculpted in place, but it just gives you a little bit more of that sense of realism that I really do appreciate. I do also like that he's got these gray panel lines. They almost come across a little bit more like a purplish gray. Again, it's just a little bit of much needed color to an otherwise all dark black costume. And of course, as we get a little bit further down, we get to the bottom of his feet. His feet are rather interesting. I'll talk about that probably more so, I think, when we get into the articulation of the figure. But I will just say, this top piece is a separate piece to this piece, which then is a separate piece to his feet. While it does line up pretty good on one side, I always seem to find on this foot, it seems to cause a bit of a gap. And I guess the design and reasoning for that is that they did want to have this as a separate piece, but I really think that this could have still been a continuation from the rest of his leg guard. It seems a bit strange that they made that as a separate piece. Even if it's designed in the movie to look like a layer, I feel like when it came to sculpting this, you don't forfeit anything necessarily, I feel at least, by having this not be the same piece as the rest of this. By having this sectional like this, you ultimately look like, at times when you're moving the figure's feet, for example, you'll find yourself forming a bit of a gap, and you'll also form more of a gap right here that I feel like could have been done away with completely had this one all been the same piece. Let's run through the posability now on Night Monkey. His head moves up and down. Doesn't give you as much clearance as I really would have hoped. While you can move the head down quite a bit, the head up, on the other hand, doesn't quite seem to pull off as much. You can compensate it, yes, by the fact that he does have the additional socket joint at the base of the neck. This gives you the additional option then of being able to hinge his head further back than what you could before. Keeping in mind, again, if you decide to swap this out with a Peter Parker head sculpt, which I didn't have, unfortunately, at the time of this review, ultimately what you're just going to be doing is removing the head, removing the neck, and then slide the fabric, or slide the flesh tone neck, I should say, into the fabric section of his collar, and then you're good to go. So we'll go ahead and look at his arms. His arms hinge out, not fully at a 90-degree angle bend, probably a little closer to 45 or a 50-degree angle bend. You can move the arms forward, you can move the arms back. I do like, again, the fact that the shoulder pads shift while you move the figure's arms. They really do a good job of staying out of the way. He does also have a forward and back crunch on the at least shoulder aspect of the figure. Has a double hinge on the elbow, and of course he has the rotation not only on the hand, but you can also hinge it back and forth. He has a bottom torso crunch, which you can also shift back and forth slightly. A little on the tight side, of course, when it comes to any of these Hot Toy figures, because they have really tight fabric, it does, of course, limit what you can really do with them. You can still get a little bit of a crunch, but not too much, though. The legs split out on both sides. You can bring the legs forward and back, of course. Swivel at the top, cut of the thigh. He has a double hinge on the knee. And then going again back to the feet. This, of course, is just simply the way it's been slid onto the leg. And then he does have an additional separate section that sort of slides into this. Again, I don't know why this couldn't have all been one piece. It makes no logical sense. It doesn't change, of course, what you can actually do with this feet. He still has the ankle pivot. You can move it up and down perfectly fine. And, of course, you can rotate the feet all the way around. What that then has anything to do with this is beyond me. I feel like, again, that could have been all one piece. But overall, a nice-looking Spider-Man. Very different in the sense that he's not what you're traditionally thinking of what Spider-Man's costume should look like. Certainly when you think of the new Marvel Universe films, the cinematic universe at least, you tend to probably think of this guy. Or at least you probably tend to think of the Far From Home Spider-Man costume, which we don't actually have just yet. I do like the idea of now being able to add on, even if it's with costumes that he had for a very short amount of time. It was certainly an impact enough that Hot Toys decided, of course, to produce a Spider-Man figure. It's a no-brainer. Hot Toys produces Spider-Man and Iron Man figures. If, of course, the costume was even in the movie for a split second, a few little moments of screen time would certainly justify then the idea of producing a figure. And in this case, of Stealth Suit Spider-Man. I'm really glad that they did. Generally, one of my pet peeves in movies is when superheroes have to adopt a brand new costume with no reasoning whatsoever. Let's just halfway through the movie give him a different costume than the one he started off with. And admittingly, yes, the Spider-Man purist in me, I think, would have been a little disappointed if he'd been swinging around in a stealth suit the entire movie. But at least unlike other movies that try to slip in new costumes, they gave a valid reason, really, why Peter had to pick up a new pair of threads, giving him this one at the beginning of the movie, and then going back and adopting the more original design of Spider-Man that we all know and love. Instead of going with blue, he went with more a slick black instead. Despite its short period of time, the stealth suit looked good on screen, harking back to like the days of the Spider-Man noir in comics. This specific design, I can't help but again look at it and think I'm looking at a black costume version of Deadpool. Of course, the big decider is the fact that the head sculpt doesn't look anything like Deadpool. I feel like it's the one thing that lets the figure down ever so slightly. Don't get me wrong, I like the design of the stealth suit Spider-Man. But I can't help but think the shiny nature of the plastic in his head makes him look a little more like an action figure and less like a realistic Hot Toys. Yes, they could have gone the approach of the Spider-Man Homecoming Spider-Man by stitching on a fabric overlay of the head sculpt. But again, then there's always the risk that they would leave those very obvious seam lines like they did with the Spider-Man Homecoming Spider-Man, which is one of my biggest problems I had with that figure. Maybe, I guess, plastic was the best way to go. His accessories aren't very big. Now, keeping in mind, again, I went with the deluxe version. The deluxe version gives you that really cool-looking light-up stand of Molten Man. But if you, I guess, got just the standard release issue of this guy, his accessories would be pretty slim, giving you some swappable hands, giving you some interchangeable webs and a different set of goggles, and of course giving you that flesh-colored stump if you wanted to use it with one of your Peter Parker head sculpts from before. But overall, I think I like the look of this figure, though it's limited when it came to his accessories. He comes out being a pretty decent-looking figure, especially when you factor in the Molten Man display stand. What do you guys think of this figure? Let me know down below in the comments section. Again, this one is coming slightly earlier. I picked this up from a new place. Probably going to be my go-to place, I feel, for future Hot Toy releases. Eventually, when they get their site up and running, I'll provide the link down below in the video descriptions where you guys can pick these ones up for yourself. If you are new to the channel and you're liking all the content you're seeing, consider the idea of hitting the subscribe button down below. Swing on over. The terrible sound of a swing. Swing on over, though, to the bell notification. Make sure you turn that on. That tells YouTube that you want to be notified when new videos are popping up. And, of course, there's going to be lots and lots of new videos coming up throughout the course of 2021. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.